John, hello.
Good morning, Madam Mayor, City Manager, members of council. My name is John Williams. I'm the Deputy Chief Appraiser as opposed to an assessor. And I'll always say that to you all until we all are on the same sheet of music. I appraise property and my staff appraises property. We have a board of assessors that were appointed by council. There are 5 of those and they meet every week. They are the board that approves all of our values. So when you hear of tax assessor, there's not just one, there's 5, and I am not one of them. I'm the Deputy Chief Appraiser. I work for the Chief Appraiser, Mrs. Betty Middleton. We report to the Board of Assessors, and if I may, there's been a lot of chatter on social media, so I just want to make something clear, if I may. And I'd like to address the audience because I think you all know that. I don't work for the mayor. I work for the Board of Assessors. Our staff works for the Board of Assessors. We don't work for the mayor and we don't work for the city manager. We work for the Board of Assessors and we report to the Georgia Department of Revenue. So we are somewhat different than most of the departments in the city. There's a lot of chatter about we're just doing this or that, but for the mayor or for the city manager, that could be no further from the truth than possible. We don't work for either one of them. So just know that, and I'll go ahead and proceed with the update.
You might want to say it one more time with the microphone so people watching on TV.
If you didn't hear me, the Board of Assessors reports to the Department of Revenue. And our office and our staff do not report to the mayor, and we do not report to the city manager, and we do not report, I'm reporting to you now, but we don't work for council either. We work for the Department of Revenue and for the Board of Assessors. Now, council does appoint the Board of Assessors, so you have that control, and I don't mean that in any negative way or flamboyant way, or I'm not trying to say I don't work for you. That's not the point. Just trying to clarify that for many of those on social media that think otherwise. You've seen this first slide many times. It's the beginning slide I use every time I brief you all on the update for the Tyler Technologies conversion and reassessment. I have with me, this is Mrs. Middleton behind me, the Chief Appraiser. Steve Wise is the revaluation project manager. I have him with me as well today for any questions that you may have of him. This is also a similar slide to the one you saw last time, I believe it was mid-June. I want to focus on the last line, those 4 bullet points on the bottom half of the page, the last bullet point, support of values. That's where we are right now. We are in the support of values stage of this 2.5-year project. So the notices went out June 30th. We mailed those on Friday. Most people started receiving those last week. And then the phone calls started to come and the visits started to come. And that's exactly what we want to happen. That is part of the process. You'll hear me talk about the process. The process in a countywide revaluation where 70,000 parcels plus or minus were assessed, you can imagine you're going to have a lot of people raise their hand or their voice and say, something's wrong, I don't like this for whatever reason. As of the end of the day yesterday, we had 159 appeals processed. So those are people that have either mailed in or come in and turned in an appeal form, and I'm going to show you that appeal form in a minute. August 14th is the end of the 45-day appeal period. So taxpayers have until August 14th to file an appeal of their assessment. That assessment and the appeal that's given each taxpayer, that is our right. I live in Muskogee County. I am appealing my assessment. And it's not because it's high, it's because it's low. There are many people that are appealing their assessment because it's high, and there are people like me that are appealing it because it's low. So we get both kinds. But I put 3 links on here, and I did that so people later on can see the links as well. These are links on the columbusga.org website. If you go to that website today, the first notice you'll see in the middle will be a notice that talks about the assessments in my office.
John, before you go on,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
might want to point out, because there were, some giggles when you said, I'm appealing my, or you're appealing yours.
Yes.
Because it's low.
Yeah.
Why would somebody do that? People always think assessment is only tied to tax amount. So why would you care very much if you had a piece of property that was low value?
And I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. I'm a licensed broker, I'm a licensed salesperson, I'm a certified appraiser in Georgia and an appraiser in Alabama as well. In my experience for doing appraisals over the last 25 years, people appeal a low assessment for just a couple reasons. Number one, they are very tied and connected to the value, and they think that is the value, that's the one value, so it's either accurate or it's not. And if it's not, I'm going to appeal. Another person would be they're going to potentially sell or market their home in the near future.
Right.
I fall into that category. I'm anticipating doing that in a couple years to come. So I want that value to reflect what I believe as an appraiser, not only as the deputy chief appraiser, but as an appraiser, what that value is. I have my own ideas what that value is. In the system, I didn't ask Steve or anybody in my office, hey, watch my property, make sure it's this or that. Just let the system take its toll on the property, and it came in below what I thought it was worth. So I'm going to appeal that.
Right.
I have a sliver of property on an H account. It's 0.27 acres. Well, that acreage is the value on that acreage is too high, in my opinion. So I'm appealing that. The appeal is part of the process. We're protected by Georgia code to be able to appeal our assessments. We want people to appeal. Just remember, we did a mass appraisal on 70,000 parcels in this county. I don't know what any individual property looks like until you appeal it and you say, hey, there's something wrong with my H account, or hey, this property can't be worth that, there's something wrong. Come into our office, file an appeal, and we'll look at that property. It's part of the process. These properties won't be complete and accurate until the appeal process is finished, and we have 180 days by code. We won't take that long, but 180 days to finish the appeal process. Then the values will be most accurate. We're still in the project. This is still part of the process. So I keep throwing those words, but that's why I would appeal a low value. I thought the same thing. Other people, there used to be loans that were made on the assessment of a property. As an appraiser, I always thought that assessed values were low historically. They're going to be slightly below market value. I think most appraisers think that in most counties. But as far as just pointing people back to the appeal process, these links take you to the appeal form that's on our website. And for those who can't see that, it's columbusga.org/tax assessors. That takes you to our website. You can also get to it through the publicaccess.columbusga.org, which is what replaced QPublic. So that's somewhere that the taxpayers can actually go and look at their assessment. You can even go and look at sales in your neighborhood. So you can do all those things on that publicaccess.columbusga.org. But these 3 links take you to our website and to the appeal form and to an explanation or instructions on how to fill out the appeal form. The next page, I've taken the appeal form, which some people haven't seen, and I've broken it into 3. So this is the top third of the appeal form. I just wanted to go through it so people understand what it is they have to do. Very simple. I actually read something on social media, I won't call out any names, and I was surprised because the gentleman said, be calm, appeal your property. They're very reasonable. They'll talk to you about your property, and I'm sure that we can come to some agreement on what your property's worth. I was surprised not only by the individual who said it, but that somebody's finally, standing up in the clouds and saying, it's okay. This is just part of the process. Appeal your property, and we'll look at it. So the first thing you do is you get one of these forms. You can get it online, as I've said, or come into our office and fill it out. Today's date is the date of the appeal that you're filling it out. The tax digest year is 2017. The name on the official notice, that notice of assessment you got, you put the same name on that line. The property or account ID is the 9-digit tax ID number that's also on your notice. The location or situs, that's the street number and street name of the property under appeal. The property type, somewhat self-explanatory, but real property is residential and commercial, business or personal property, aircraft, boat, motor vehicle, or manufactured home. So those are the different types of property that you can appeal. The middle half of that document, I'm sorry, okay. The middle, and we can go back and, the middle portion of the tax appeal form on the left-hand side, you see the boxes marked value, uniformity of assessment, taxability, exemption denied, breach of covenant, and denial of covenant. That top box is the box that most people are going to want to check. You don't agree with the value that we've assessed your property at, that is the box you would check. Some people check all the boxes. I don't know what I want to appeal, it's just wrong. I want to appeal my taxes. You've heard me say before, we don't assess taxes. My personal campaign is to remove taxes from the tax assessor name. We assess property for taxation purposes. If you notice on the bottom of the assessment form, it says estimate of taxes. That's just based on what your assessed value is, but it's appealable. So your taxes could go up, they could go down. That's a tax commissioner's office question. Uniformity assessment just says mine's not assessed like all the others on my street, or all the other two-story houses like mine, I'm high or I'm low. It's not uniform. It's not the same as something that's like my house. Taxability, unless you have a tax-exempt property, you would not check this box. That box is for exempt property. So if we send a notice to a church, for example, and we taxed it as if it was just a normal building instead of a church, then they would appeal based on taxability. So that's what that box is for. Exemptions, we also approve or deny exemptions. For example, 100% disabled veteran exemption. We approve or deny those applications. So if we denied it, they would check that box if they didn't agree that, if they thought they were exempt, if you thought you were exempt and if we said you weren't, you would check exemption denied and then appeal that decision. The other two deal with covenant land, and that's a very unique property characteristic that most people don't fall under. I believe we have just under 100 parcels that are under that covenant. So the other half of that is what you must select. Most people select the Board of Equalization. Let me go ahead and say this. If you go to the Board of Equalization website, that falls under the clerk Superior Court. The Board of Equalization is a board of 3 people, and I believe they have 3 boards. So there are actually 9 Board of Equalization members, and they have alternates. And if you've been to an appeal and been to a BOE, a lot of people think you're just another arm of the government. You work for the tax assessors, you work for the mayor, you work for the city manager. The Board of Equalization is under the clerk, appointed by the clerk, and they represent taxpayers. They represent people like us that live in the county, like these folks who live in the county. They are just like you, except they probably have a little bit more knowledge on real estate in Columbus. So when you appeal to the Board of Equalization, you're going to go before a board of 3 people that are going to hear your case, and then they're going to hear our case, and they're going to decide what evidence supports what value, and then make a decision. Before you get to the Board of Equalization, what we refer to as the BOE, the arbitration, the hearing officer, or Superior Court, we're going to work that appeal. And what I mean by work that appeal is you give me your appeal form, we're going to go through it, look at your records, look at your property, look at any information you give us that says, hey, here's some comparable sales my realtor printed up for me, and I just wanted to bring this in. Or I've hired an attorney, and he's representing me. Or I've hired an appraiser, and this appraiser gave me this appraisal, and here's the evidence for my house and what I think it's worth. All those are different forms of support for your appeal. You don't have to do any of that. I suggest you have some support for your value. That doesn't mean you have to hire an attorney, and it doesn't mean you have to hire an appraiser. I would recommend you don't save the money until you end up going to the BOE. Here's what's going to happen when you file an appeal. We're going to get it and process it, and then we're going to send you a letter as a response to your appeal that says, there's been no change in the value. We think our value's correct, or we've reduced the value based on what you've shown us, or what we've talked about, or what we've found. And we're going to send that letter to you. You have a time period, 30 days. A change is, if you get a reduction, you have 30 days to decide, is this reduction good enough? I'm happy with that, or no, I'm not happy with that. I want to continue my appeal. Well, if you check BOE, your next step is that 3-member Board of Equalization. If you check arbitration, your next step is an individual arbitrator that will meet with both parties. If you check hearing officer, that's only for property in excess of $750,000 fair market value. So most individual homeowners don't have that. A lot of commercial property is at that level. A lot of business property could be at that level. Or you can select to go directly to Superior Court. I personally don't recommend that. I like to stay out of court. Court is expensive, and I'm going to try to have our staff make sure that our assessment is accurate before we ever get to court. So the appeal is the beginning of this process. It's at the end of this 2.5-year project. And when you file the appeal and check one of these boxes, that tells us what you're appealing and which direction you want to go after we have tried to resolve the appeal at our level. A box new for last year at the bottom of this center third is owner's stated value. It says required. The reason that's required is there are certain circumstances, if we don't do our job right, then that value is the value for the current tax year and 2 future years. Any value determined by the appeal process is good for the current tax year, which would be 2017, and any future, or the next future 2 years. So that stated value is very important. Please don't put $1. You see that every once in a while. Property is generally worth more than $1. Try to give us a realistic value there, because we want to know what you think your property's worth. The bottom third, we state who the owner or the agent. Now, an agent is someone representing you. Could be an attorney. A lot of commercial property owners have tax agents that work for them, and so that name would be filled in there. You see the box to the lower right, it says note. If the appeal form is signed by an agent, a letter of authorization must accompany the filing of the appeal. The letter of authorization must be signed by the owner of the property. What that does is protect the homeowner from somebody just scouring through tax records and go, you know what, I'm going to file an appeal for this person because I think it's low. Big commercial property, I'm going to get that account, I'm going to file it, but there's no signature from the owner. So that letter of authorization has to come from the owner and has to be signed by the owner. The mailing address, if different from the situs address, just go ahead and fill it out anyways. I skipped a line, check if you are the owner or the agent. Talks about the letter of authorization. Any phone numbers, go ahead and give us your best number. For me, it's a cell phone number. We're not going to share any of this information with anybody. We're not going to put your phone number in the public records online. But we want a good way to contact you, and of course the signature. Filing this document on the bottom, filing of this document will create a review of the county's value of the property being appealed. Reasonable notice is hereby provided that an on-site inspection by a member of the county appraisal staff may be required. When would that be required? If you file an appeal and we can't negotiate a value, and you go on to the BOE, the Board of Equalization. Before we get to the Board of Equalization, we will visit your property to make sure one last time that we're completely accurate. We'll take pictures on the outside of the property, If you let us in, we'll go in. We'd love to come into the property. A lot of people don't like that. That's fine. We can give our best assessment by viewing the inside of your property. But I understand a lot of people don't want that to happen, and that's fine. That's your right. But that is the appeal form. I just wanted to describe the process, give everybody an idea of exactly what they should do. And I believe that's all I have. I'll take any questions you may have.
See, we have Counselor Garrett.
Yes, sir.
I've got a couple of questions. If someone does get a appraiser and they go to the Board of Equalization, is that one of the fees that can be refunded, or do you have to go to the Superior Court first?
Superior Court.
Okay. And I mean, I just know from my law firm alone, on the low end, people who have come to us asking about appeals had a 100% increase. On the high end, we've got people who have had over a 1,000% increase. Why are we not flagging these before people get alarmed and they see their property go up 10 times in a year? I mean, that's got to be obvious that there's some sort of error in the system.
And we've had this type of question, as you would imagine, for over a week now. Again, I can only take you mentally to the 70,000 parcel realm that we did this mass appraisal on. So when we, for example, go to land values, and there's been discussion about land sales and what sales did you use. For example, there's been approximately 120 land sales, vacant land sales in the last 3 years. So we go back and look at those land sales. And we say, well, here's a few in this neighborhood and some in this neighborhood. Some neighborhoods didn't have any, but there were land sales from adjacent or nearby neighborhoods. So those sales tell us what the land's worth, or we use and I hate to get into technicalities, but the residual technique for getting land value. So you have a sale of a house, you know what that house costs new. And if you remove that value of what that house costs new from that total sale, the residual is the land value and any improvements to the land. So that's another technique that we use to derive land value. It's authorized by the Department of Revenue. Fee appraisers use the same technique. It's just part of what we do. So those land values are then applied across that area, regardless of maybe topography or some other factor that may drive that value down. It's a base rate that's applied to all the land in an area. So to do that equally, we had to go into our 35-year-old OASIS system and remove all the influences of value that were there. I keep hitting this thing. Remove all the influences of value that were there and then appraise all that land. So we have brand new values for all the land in the county. Then we go back and put some of those negative influences or positive influences back on that property afterwards. Well, some of those influence factors may or may not have been applied. They may not have been applied when they needed to be, because we're, again, looking at the 70,000 parcel spectrum. The appeal process is so important because a person with a 100% or 1,000% increase says, this can't be right. There's something wrong with this value. Please appeal, and we're going to look at your property. And it may be wrong. It may be right. Just because a property value went up doesn't mean there was a mistake or an omission or some factor wasn't applied. I mean, that's a fact. Sure. We have some value that went up. We have some values that went up that maybe went up too high. I don't know that from the 70,000 parcel perspective until you appeal.
Okay.
So I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Well, I just hope that before we get to the point where the city's paying a bunch of attorney's fees, if things get appealed to the Superior Court, that we're very much scrutinizing these values, because, I mean, some of them, they've jumped up.
Yes.
In my neighborhood alone, I mean, what's crazy is that the ones that were frozen, we went down, and my property went down by tens of thousands, and I bought it for $40,000 more than what it went down to. And then there's people knocking down houses and putting up $500,000 houses right around me. And I'm in walking distance to some of the best school districts. And it doesn't make sense to me that I've got clients that went up 1,000% and then I went down in value. And then a house 3 down from me went up in value, very similar houses. I mean, I definitely think we need to explain to the public, you know, how this system calculated everything. But
how the system calculated the value, and I'm not trying to repeat myself or minimize what we do, but again, I try not to get in real in-depth, and we certainly can to each and every individual that comes in. We can explain to the best of our ability exactly how we got to that value. But just like we analyzed the land sales, we analyzed all these sales over the last 3 years by area. And it gave us not only a price per acre or per square foot of land, but a price per square foot of property. And then that was applied to each and every house in that area. Houses that went up hundreds or 1,000%, there may be an instance where that house hasn't been looked at in many years. We are mandated to look at a third of the properties in the county every year. So every 3 years, we're required to have seen all the property, not seen visually, but looked at all the properties in the county. Because of the homestead freeze, I'm not saying good or bad, I'm not trying to pick a side on that debate. Because of the freeze, lots of values have been the same for many years. And property values under that freeze didn't go up. We still tried to look at a third of the properties every year. So I've heard a lot of people say, wow, that's crazy. Why did it jump up so much? Well, it's very possible that it should have come up years ago, but didn't. And when we did a countywide reassessment, all the properties were looked at. All the properties were reassessed. I'm not saying that every increase is perfect. That is opposite of what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to look at every property that somebody does not agree with the assessment. Let me also say this. Our Board of Assessors has decided, for example, we have 10 appeals from one subdivision, and there's 100 properties in that subdivision. But those 10 appeals, every one of them were proven to be high. Well, we're going to go ahead and look at that entire subdivision and make sure that they too are accurate. Based on the results of the 10 appeals, let's go back and look at the other 90 properties and make sure they're right. Because there may be an indicator there that we need to look at. And if so, we'll fix those. We'll make those right if something needs to be fixed. What we're seeing, I spoke to a taxpayer yesterday. He had a parcel it was built in the 40s, small house, 2-bedroom, 1-bath house on a corner lot in an area that's now zoned light manufacturing industrial. So you saw the zoning regulations that you all talked about earlier, that zoning impacts the value of property. So we value land as if it were vacant and ready for its highest and best use. So if it's zoned light manufacturing industrial, the highest and best use for that land could be industrial, could be commercial. It's got a 1940-something house on it, 2-bedroom, 1-bath siding, covered front porch, gets $500 or $600 a month in rent. The system said that's on a corner lot in this neighborhood, zone commercial, that land's worth a good bit more than if it was just a residential property. So the system said value it commercial. Now that's accurate. That it should be valued as a commercial piece of property. But there's a tremendous influence on that value because it's being used as a house. It's not worth what a commercial piece of property is worth. There's an influence factor that needs to be applied to that property. And when I went back into that parcel and applied the correct influence, the value came down to where both he and I agreed that's probably where it should be.
So that's something that will be adjusted. I'm sure Councilor Allen will have some comments on this because the clients have called me, have primarily been living in Midland or off County Line Road, and they have acreage around their house. And they've seen these drastic increases. One of them that was 500% bought his house 10 years ago, high of the market. So you would think that would have been, it'd be somewhere near that value, but it went 500%. But so if somebody's got a house and they've got acreage around it, it probably would have gone up and could be brought down.
It could be, and it's an individual basis on appeal, like we've been talking about this morning. We want to look at that individually. It's not fair to the taxpayer or to you or I to sit here and try to guess about that particular property and why it may have been too high or not high enough. You know, The H account, for me personally, my values, there was an additional factor that needed to be applied to the remaining acreage on my land, because when not applied, it was worth more than the 2 acres were worth. So that's a factor that needs to be applied that wasn't.
Okay.
So we are seeing, and just for a reference, there's approximately 1,200 H account parcels in the county, 1,200 out of 70,000. So I know, primarily it's the northern and panhandle, that section you talked about, northwest, all across the county line area where the H accounts exist. So I've found some H account properties, there's not a problem with it at all. No problem. In the same neighborhood. So there's just, in some instances, some further refinement that needs to take place. And we want to do that. We want to get it right. And the only way for us to do that is for people to file that appeal and allow us to look at their property individually and make whatever adjustments need to be made.
Yeah, thank you.
John, can you explain what an H account is?
H account is a term that we use. We have your 9-digit parcel number. We put an H after the end of it. When you file for homestead exemption, the law allows you to file an exemption on your house and 2 acres. If you have more than 2 acres, that additional acreage is put on what we call the H account, H for homestead. And it is valued, it should be valued similarly to the acreage that's under your house, but it is valued separately. Your homestead exemption is applied to the value of your house in the 2 acres. That's frozen for taxation purposes, but the H account can fluctuate, and your taxes can fluctuate on the additional acreage.
Okay. Counselor Davis.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Williams, I got
Yes, sir.
that right. Right.
Say again?
I got that right, Mr. Williams? Good morning to you. Look, you said you work for the Department of Revenue.
Yes, sir.
And I think everybody understands that. I think this council knowingly has the ability to make a lot of decisions to cover this whole government.
Yes, sir.
That understood, but we work for the citizens.
Yes.
That's our job, so we have a responsibility as well. And you just happen to be the spokesman today, so just don't take anything I say personal.
I understand.
Because I'm representing my constituency.
Yes, sir.
If I'm talking to anybody, I'm talking to everybody in this room, including this body here, the administration, everybody, because this is a concern. And quite frankly, to me, it's a little more complicated than what's being discussed today.
Okay.
And, my constituency is, quite frankly, mad as hell. And I don't use that word much, and I don't think I've ever used it in this council chambers, but I use it figuratively because I know that's a hot place, a very hot place, and probably there's going to be a lot of temperatures rising today and throughout our community. But, I've got a responsibility and I got to do my job as well. I am concerned about some of the things that were brought up about the software itself.
Okay.
I know what we've gone through over time, how it's been presented to this body, and what we've been told, but one of the things that I'm concerned about, we're talking about a process that the assessor's office is telling us that this is part of the work in progress. Well, when exactly did you know that this appeal process was going to take place like this? When did you know that these valuations and these assessments were going to be all over the board?
My name is Randy Lomax, and I'm the attorney for the Board of Tax Assessors. Let me address one of your comments real quick. The appeal process this year is no different than what it's been every year. Every year when the tax notices have gone out.
No, it is going to be different this year. We understand that, but it is going to be different this year.
It's going to be different in terms of the number of appeals filed.
Magnitude, correct.
Okay, but the actual process is statutorily oriented, and it is the same. The only difference this year should be the number of appeals that are going to be filed.
And the number of corrections.
We don't know what the corrections
Well,
will be.
you've already told us that. You've
Yeah.
told us that there's an issue and that we're trying to solve it through the appeals. It is different than all the other appeal processes.
Okay,
In magnitude and in the process and in the clarification
okay.
of what exactly is happening in the assessments and valuations. Would you agree?
No, I do not agree. I will agree that the
The
number.
citizens don't agree with you.
Well-
Counselor Davis, would you just let him answer the question? I mean, and hold on just a second. I appreciate this, that's fine. We don't usually allow people to clap or boo or whatever, so please just be respectful of that, whatever the issue may be, whether it's the closing of Leonard Street or whatever it may be. And Counselor Davis, if you're going to ask questions, please give the speaker the opportunity to
I didn't
respond.
ask
You've interrupted
the
at every single
attorney
response.
for the tax assessor's office a question. I asked Mr. Williams a question.
Well, he's here to help respond to legal questions, so
Well, the
ask a
question I asked, Mayor, was when did they know about it? When did they know that this part of the process is being presented by Mr. Williams and what he's telling us? And that's completely acceptable.
Sure.
Because it's the process. It's the right process. So I do agree with that.
Right.
Okay? And that's how you're doing it. But when did you know that it was going to be this complicated and that the valuations and assessments were going to be all over the board?
Okay.
When you bought the software,
Now,
a
we-
year into it,
Okay, we
2 months
start,
ago?
Are you going to let him answer?
Well,
You've
we-
asked the question, let him answer, then you can ask more questions. We've got all day. We can be here till 9 PM, so go ahead, answer the question, then he can ask some
we
more
started
questions.
the process with Tyler Technologies back in the summer of 2014. We started the software upgrade and the revaluation process in the fall of 2014. We received all of the values the early part of this year, and we started sending out notices on June 30. We knew when we sent out notices that there was going to be a backlash, mainly because it is human nature that if my value goes up, it must be wrong. We understand that. But if 50% went up, 50% may have gone down, and I'm sure the folks whose value have gone down are not going to complain like the ones who went up. The process itself, the logistics of appealing will be the same. What is going to change this year is the number of appeals and the fact that there may be many more corrections as a result of the number of appeals. But Councilor Davis, every property owner who got a notice and who is unhappy with that notice needs to do a little research themselves. Simply because the value went up does not mean that it's wrong. I encourage and absolutely almost insist that the property owner go online to the tax assessor's website. As part of our software upgrade, we upgraded the website. Click on the property page and be nosy. Look at the map, look at the properties surrounding their property, look at comparable values, and see what characteristics apply to their property that may or may not apply to other properties. And then, Councilor Garrett, if I was you, I would tell your client who called, I would ask them, did you do that? I would ask them, did you go to the tax assessor's office and ask them to give you the 5 comparable properties that they use to value your property? Look at that, and that will help you figure out whether or not a mistake was made with your property or whether it was valued in line with the other properties. Do the underlying research to determine whether or not it's valued correctly or incorrectly, but don't make the assumption simply because it went up that it must be wrong.
Okay, Mr. Lomax, you really are talking about the crux of my concern, and I appreciate that.
Okay? Good.
And let me tell you, it's not just the tax assessor's office, it's the legacy of this administration, it's this council, it's everybody that's involved. It's not just one matter. So, Mayor, these questions are very valid.
Sure. You just
And
need
the
to hear the
citizens
answer.
want to know. Now, you answered my question. You told me that you realized there was going to be an issue when you mailed these notices out. Okay, here's my concern. Why did somebody not come to this council early on to let us know, or to let the citizens, to put the citizens on notice? They're finding out through their tax notices. That's why I'm a little concerned. They're finding out about the process you're talking about through their tax notices. Now, is that fair? No, what that's done is created a hornet's nest. That's why they're mad as hell. Because they're getting these and the rumor mill's starting and nobody knows, and then all of a sudden everybody's coming in and just go through the process, just go through the process. That's not fair to the citizenry. So my concern as a council member is why 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 4 months ago, did not somebody come here and tell us this is what's about to happen, get ready, so people could prepare?
Counselor Davis,
Now,
if we
now-
had come to the council 2 months ago and said, councilors, look, on June 30, we're going to send out notices. We think everybody's going to be upset. Values are going up, but we don't know how much they're going up. We think we're going to have appeals, but we don't know how many appeals. We would have just put, I think, a black cloud over us for
Well,
2 or 3 months in
that's-
anticipation of the notices going out. I really don't, and there's no right answer or wrong answer to your question, but I don't know that forewarning of what is going to happen would have stopped any of the concerns or the speculation as to the notices going out. Notices have gone out every year for the past several years as statutorily required. This year is no different except for the change in the valuation as a result of the revaluation of all the properties.
Look, they're all over the board, okay? Either
They
what
are.
you said tells me there's a glitch with the software, we got a problem with the software.
We don't believe there's a
They
glitch with the
didn't,
software.
what we've been sold as a city, and how we're going through this process, it wasn't sold to us as going to be a complex matter. Matter of fact, they've had other issues. Was the company you're dealing with involved with the Fulton County matter?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, I know they've had some issues up in Atlanta too, in the same matter, the same issue, and they've had to put things on delay up there just to iron it all out. And, the appeal process and talking about that, look, I don't blame anybody, okay? And like I said, the appeal process, well, let me go back. For not putting the citizens or us on notice, I do think people need to take responsibility for that. But as far as the process and going through the process, I think that's it. But the complexity of this and what we're talking about, it's going to cost people a lot of money. Does that really matter to anybody? Does it
Well-
matter that they're going to have to take time out of their day? Does it matter that they're going to have to hire appraisers? Does it matter, like Councilor Garrett said, they're going to have to hire attorneys?
Well, first of
Possibly have
all,
to go
you
to
do not
court?
have to hire an attorney to file an appeal.
You've got a
You
lot
do
of
not
people, it's
have
going to take
hire-
a
May I
lot of
finish, please?
workload. A lot of workload, I'm not
Okay.
finished. A lot of workload it's going to take to fix this matter. And I don't think just filing the process is where it's all going to stop. I mean, it's just going to be far more complex than that. And I care about the citizens. I care about what they're having to go through. It's a major headache is what it is. And we just did not put them on notice, or somebody didn't put them on notice, and they needed to be on notice of what they're about to go through. And we probably could have avoided a lot of these things.
I do not agree with avoiding the concerns that are expressed now by putting people on notice, but that's just a matter of opinion. Now, let me go back and try to address some of your points. Yes, I understand that the appeal process is time-consuming. Yes, I understand that a person has to take off time from work to engage in the appeal process. No, I do not agree that they have to hire an appraiser. They may want to hire an appraiser to substantiate their value. No, I do not agree that they have to hire an attorney. If they go to Superior Court, they may choose to hire an attorney, but a vast majority of people who go to the Board of Equalization represent themselves. And they are more than capable of doing so. It is a personal decision whether or not you want to engage an attorney. As an attorney, I think it's a good idea, but it's not a requirement. But the appeal process is the same that it's been for many years. We have not changed that. We think if there are mistakes, if there is a mistake with a property owner's valuation, it will be corrected in the appeal process. We also believe that if a person files an appeal, that our internal review of that property is going to resolve a lot of the problems before it ever gets to the Board of Equalization. So in terms of time, the only time a property owner may have to expend is the time to actually file the appeal form.
Well, I'm really concerned why a lot of this was not cross-checked early on. It sounds to me like let's implement a software, let's just put it in, let it spit out the numbers, and then we'll figure it out through the appeal process. Yeah, I don't understand why a lot of this has not been cross-checked. Why has it not been cross-checked or determined that there are some extreme variances here with the numbers? And, I'm in that situation too. I'm trying to figure out with all my tax notices what in the world happened. Because they're all over the board, I can tell you that.
Right.
And you're wrong about it not costing people. It's going to cost people. Do you understand the business side of it and the corporate side of it, how that's going to affect people? I've even been told from decisions that have been made a long time ago, decisions that people have already appealed and they've had to pay to go through the process, where they've had to hire appraisers to get it right and to get it corrected just recently. Then all of a sudden it changes again. They got to go right back through the process all over again. And then you got people who are dealing with mortgage companies. You got renters. You got a majority of these properties you're talking about, people are renting them. We don't even know how that's going to affect them. I assume that the cost of living is going to go up for a lot of people. I assume that these increases and the increases in the taxes are just going to get pushed on to the people who rent in this community. Possibly some people be put out of their homes. Some people are not even going to get their notices if it goes right to the mortgage companies. So there is a complexity in all this. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to cost people. It just puts a burden on the citizenry, and I question that. And I hope you respect that that's my job in representing the citizens, to question that. Now, they've heard from the tax assessor's office and you as well about the process, but still there's a lot of issues here in the complexity of this. I just don't think it's so simple as just go through the appeal process. It really, what I'm heard today leads me to believe, I don't have a lot of confidence in this system. I think there's going to continue to be kinks, and it's going to take quite a while to work out. But yet we're putting deadlines out there for people. Deadlines which they got to get all this stuff done. A lot of people are not going to be able to meet these deadlines.
Well, people have until August the 14th to file their appeal. Once the appeal is filed, we'll work through the process, see if we will look at the property, and if there is an error in the valuation, it will be corrected. If it is not corrected to the satisfaction of the property owner can continue the appeal process and go to the Board of Equalization and hopefully get whatever relief they're entitled to there.
Can you explain, Randy, about what Councilor Davis was saying related to, or probably this question's for John, I guess. Did you just apply the software and not cross-check? I mean, how do you do that? I mean, is that what's going on here? Is that you just applied the software and you're expecting these appeals to cross-check everything?
No, we don't think so. We have a representative from Tyler Technologies, and maybe we can let him explain to council how the software works in terms of determining value. Maybe that would be useful.
Well, and that's fine, but in particular, and we got a lot of people that want to speak here, but in particular, I'd like to know what was done in addition to just applying the software.
Sure.
I mean, surely, I hope, you can tell us what cross-checks. John, you want to say that? And then if we want to hear from Tyler, but we do have a lot of folks in line, but we've got all day. Okay, well, let's hold on. I just asked a question. Well, you stopped, and so I'm going to get to you as soon as my question's been answered, I'm going to get back to you. Okay, go ahead. Well, you didn't say anything, so let's just answer the question that's on the floor, and then we'll get right back to Councilor Davis. Like I said, we got all day.
The question on the board is, did we just employ a software and not do any kind of checks or rechecks or anything like that? And that Hades word you used earlier, sir, we were in that form of spreadsheet Hades for the last month. And one of the things that the public access software does that I keep talking about, where people can go to publicaccess.columbusga.org, look at their property, they can go and look at sales in the neighborhood, and that'll plot them on a map, and then can zoom in item by item, look at sale by sale. But we looked at everything on spreadsheets because you can quickly, as anyone that uses a spreadsheet knows, you can categorize and organize it, highest to lowest, lowest to highest. We looked at increases, decreases, no changes. We looked at them over and over and over again. So the results you see in your constituents are my customers. And so when they're unhappy, I'm not happy about that either. And we're going to satisfy our customers to the best of our ability. You'll see me at every BOE, Board of Equalization. You'll see me at every court case. You'll see me everywhere in between. And not that I just represent our department and the 23 people that work for me. We want to be correct. We didn't just throw the values out there, let it just tell us what's there. And I'll bring Steve up asking a technician to summarize something. And if it's been over-summarized, I apologize. I'm trying to stay away from the technical aspects of this discussion for everybody's sake. But Steve knows what his project was. I've heard him explain this process to a taxpayer that came in this week to appeal their property. And just to echo what Randy said, it may cost you time to file an appeal, but you do not have to engage the services of an appraiser, a realtor, a broker, anybody, an attorney, anybody to file that appeal. As a matter of fact, you can click it online, fill it out at your home, and mail it to us. You don't have to come in. We'll call you. We'll talk about the appeal. It doesn't cost you anything but time, and I realize more than as much as anyone, time is valuable. We didn't do it to harass anybody, but I assure you, any countywide revaluation in any state in America is going to have these kind of things come up. My property value went up. Why? Well, we'll tell you why, but we can't do it to 70,000 people at once. We can only do them one at a time. And that's why I talk about the process. No, it was not just thrown out there. Those values look good, check, send them out. Nope. We were mandated by June 30th to get them out, and we got them out. So the next mandated timeline, we didn't just come up with that. That's the law, 45 days.
Okay.
And we want to work with all the appellants within 45 days. We have 180 days to finish that. And if we don't get finished in 180 days, we have 180 more days to finish it. So we'll deal with each and every appeal adequately, and we're going to get it right. But no, sir, we didn't just throw values out on a notice without checking it. We quadruple checked it. We looked at everything over and over. Steve personally looked at every value 2, 3, sometimes 4 times. Now, why then did it get out incorrect? Question. We found one where 110 in the wrong place made it, instead of 100%, it was 0% in value. So the value was the land value, and there was no building value. Who put the 0 in? Somebody put the 0 in. Who did it? Don't know, but it's there. So when you take the 0 away, it appraises the way it should. The software, anybody know the acronym WYSIWYG? What you see is what you get, what you put into the software. We're all humans working the software, so there is an opportunity for human error. I'm not suggesting that all these are human error. I'm just saying that's part of it as well. That's why the appeal process is so important. Steve, you want to...
Let's get back to Counselor Davis, and then Tyler, I'm sure we do want to hear from them eventually, but we've got so many lined up. Let's give Counselor Davis the floor, and then if there's further clarification, y'all.
I do want to encourage property owners to go to the city's website. You will see in the middle of the page my press release, which was sent to both the print media and news media on Friday. I don't think they have published it yet, but review my press release. It does give some background. It also points you to the tax assessor's website. And I strongly encourage property owners to go to the tax assessor's website, spend some time, look at the different pages. It discusses the appeal process. It also has the property information page, which will give you information regarding your property and comparable properties. I think that is important to take a look at.
Okay. Counselor Davis?
Mr. Madam City Attorney, what ability does the council have in working through a matter like here, and I use the case like in Fulton County, does the council have the ability to approve a freeze across the board and to still allow new property or new valuations come on to be assessed and evaluated until a specific time in order to work out all these kinks or glitches or valuations, whatever you want to call them?
No, sir, I would say council does not have that authority. As was pointed out earlier, council's authority is in appointing assessors. Assessors by Georgia state law are a totally independent entity that use their professional judgment to make determinations of the value.
Does the tax assessor's office have that authority to do that?
The Board of Tax Assessors.
Are you aware of the situation in Atlanta that took place?
No, I have not followed that, sir.
Could you get some information and give us an update on that and how that arrived and how they determined that they were freezing their assessments and valuations until they got it all worked out?
I will.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
And Mayor, in finishing, look, guys, I don't have any heartache with you or anything like that. I mean, I'm as confused as everybody else. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason with my evaluations and assessments, so I'm just looking at others too and what I've heard. I ran into 4 people in the coffee shop this morning that said the same thing. They don't know. Theirs all went down. And these are pretty nice homes. Theirs went down, and then you got houses that are 50, 60 years old going up. But it does affect the values, because now people are saying, even in Muskogee County, what they thought was their value when they go down. Nice homes in nice areas, that's going to be used against them when they go to sell their properties and all. And their investments are also subject to be affected. So there's a complexity here that I haven't grasped yet. I'm not so sure that you guys really have taken hold of this. So that's why I said it's a complex matter, and I think this is just the surface of it, in my opinion, and I think there's more to come. Thank you, Mayor.
And you're right, it is complex. And if I was Walker Garrett and I was an attorney and someone called and said, I'm not happy with my valuation, I think it's wrong, the first question I would ask is, why do you think it's wrong? Most folks are going to say, well, it went up. Well, that's not why it's wrong. What do you have to support that it is wrong? You can get the information you need to make that decision from the tax assessor's website. Go look at the property information page, look at surrounding properties, see how they are valued, see what the differences are between that property and your property, and then invest a little bit of time, come down to the tax assessor's office, ask that they give you, and they're statutorily required to do so, give you the information on 3 or 5 comparable properties. Now, you may have to pay 25 cents a page for a copy, but get that information and make your own decision then as to whether or not the value is right or wrong.
All right, continuing on with discussion and questions, we have Counselor Thomas.
Mr. Williams, thank you so much for your presentation here this morning. It was very enlightening. I do have a number of questions, though, that I would like to ask you. One of the things you said was you had 158 appeals so far. How does that compare to a usual year of appeals? Is that more or less? Or?
It's more.
And we are in the first week, I guess?
Well, because of the 4th, it depends. We're in the 2nd calendar week
Okay.
of appeals.
If a homeowner or taxpayer appeals the tax bill, give me an idea of how long this process is going to take to get before they get a final resolution. I know you said that statutorily there are deadlines, there are 180 days and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, ma'am.
But just tell me generally, if I made an appeal how long would it take before I got a final answer?
And I can only speak historically, and we have already begun to work the appeals that we have in place. So we're already talking to homeowners about their appeal.
If I decide to appeal, for example, to the Board of Equalization, what kind of, are we talking months? Are we talking weeks? Are we talking sometime next year, or?
Let's hope not. The Board of Equalization are scheduled by the clerk's office, and that administrator for the Board of Equalization schedules all those appointments. Of course, they work hand in hand with our administrative team to make sure that we can schedule so many a day and how many a day can we get to. Last year, that appeal, the BOE season that I like to call it, began in September and carried forward into January.
And in the meantime, while I am appealing my tax bill,
yes,
I need to pay my taxes, right?
that's correct.
And if it's found to be that my appeal is awarded to me,
Yes,
then I will get a refund,
you will
right?
get a refund from the tax commissioner's office. And let me just say, you don't pay 100% of your taxes when you appeal a property. And Randy can make sure I'm right on this. You pay 85% of your taxes when you appeal your property. So it's not 100% of that bill. And that tax bill, everybody remember, comes from the tax commissioner. What you got from us was the notice of assessment.
I just don't want our folks to think that because they are appealing, they don't have to pay what is due.
That's a very good point.
Councilor Thomas,
One
if
of
I
the-
could interrupt, you also asked how long would it take? Once you file the notice of appeal, before it gets to the Board of Equalization, we're going to conduct a review inside the office, which is required by statute. So we are optimistic that our internal review of that property under appeal is going to resolve a lot of the issues before it ever gets to the Board of Equalization.
And I know, given the fact that there are a large number of appeals this year, it may take a little longer than normal. One of the things that I would like to know, too, is what was the method used to assess the property? For example, my property, my homestead went down. As far as I know, nobody from the tax assessor's office came to my house. I know they didn't ring my doorbell. I have read online, and I know if it's online, it's got to be true, right?
That's right.
But, you know, that you did this by Google Map or some other process of looking at my property to make that assessment. How did you arrive at my assessment?
Everyone can go, and I'll try to answer that question and not over-summarize and not go into too much detail, but let me say the methodology that we use, and there are three forms of methodology. It's cost approach to value, the market or the sales comparison analysis, or the income approach to value. Whether it's personal property, real property, whatever it is, that's the approaches that we use. And that's the approaches every county use. And that methodology is in print on our website. You can go to the columbusga.org/tax assessors, and on the left-hand side, you can see methodology. You click on that button, PDF comes up, and it describes in some detail those approaches to value. So that's the one place that you can go, and I'm not going to read that to you. I can describe to you how we arrived at possibly the value of your house.
Well, that's one of the things, Mr. Williams, is that people have said, you just plugged my address into your software, and that was it.
I wish it were that easy. I really, really do, because we would have gotten notices out so much earlier and are taking a vacation before appeal season. It just doesn't work that way. We didn't go and inspect your property, but somebody's been to your property in the past. So we have a sketch of your house, right? The aerial imagery you mentioned before, not necessarily Google Maps, but there are mapping software that Tyler Technology engages that takes our sketch and superimposes it over the aerial imagery. And so you can tell from that, those two images being together, if there's a change in your property. Let's say you added a family room to the back of your house. We'd see that old sketch, new image, there's a room on the back of the house. So a certified appraiser, certified who had worked in this city, certified by the state of Georgia, went out and remeasured your house because there was a change. Well, that's one house, one change. So they took notes on what was built there. We made sure there was a permit for that structure, and we tracked those permits as well. They would also confirm the other aspects that we know about your house: brick, siding, quality, condition, those things. And then bring all that information back and plug that into the software. So what this county paid for was a revaluation that was done. A lot of people refer to it as a desktop, but somebody in our meeting yesterday said there was a van out in front of my house 2 years ago. Was that part of this? Absolutely it was, and we announced that. It was given by notice on our website and the city's website that Tyler Technologies is driving around the city taking pictures of the front of your house. So that's a current image. Then they do the sketch that I told you about with overlaid with the aerial imagery to determine any variance based from what we had in our records to what is. If there was a change, an appraiser went out and inspected your property. Nobody went to your house, or at least you didn't see them, because probably there was no change to your house. And if there was a change, they went there, you just didn't see them.
That's frightening.
It is, isn't it? I shouldn't joke around. It's not a joking matter. We have the authority to be on your property. That doesn't mean we walk around and go in your backyard. We'd rather put what we call a door hanger on your front door and let you know we've been there and we'd like to make an appointment with you. That's what we try to do.
One of the other things that I have read on the social media pages a good bit is that it seems that the properties that went down in value, such as mine, are properties that are under the freeze. And the properties that went up in value are all the other properties in town because you could go up in value. Would you speak to that?
All I can say is there's absolutely no connection to that whatsoever. And you can laugh, there is no connection. We know what property is a homestead, but we valued the property, let the system value that property and all properties. Then we went back and placed the homesteads back on them before notices went out. So there was no list, where the council person's houses, we want to make sure those go down. There was none of that kind of selective valuation going on. We did a mass appraisal of all the property, taxable property in the county. There's no connection between a 100% disabled veteran and his complete exemption. Let's just go ahead and lower. We didn't do anything like that. None of that was considered until all the values were already established and before notices were sent out.
Well, one last thing that I want to say, and some of this goes along with what Councilor Davis was saying and what Mr. Lomax said. One of the things that would have been helpful to me as a counselor is that a couple of months ago, I assume that someone in the tax assessor's office thought, gosh, look at all of these assessments. They're coming in a lot different than last year, either higher or lower. Look at all of this. If we had known that, if someone had come to us and said, hey, we are in the final throes of this new process and we're seeing this phenomena. We don't know what it is fully yet, but just be aware that it's out there. I would have been aware of that. And when I got the phone call yesterday from a gentleman who has some rental property, who said to me, my tax bill has been $700 on a rental house that I have. It went up to $2,500. What am I supposed to do? My response to him had to be, I don't know. And if you know anything about any of the counselors sitting around this table, that is the worst answer you can give a constituent, is that you don't know.
I agree.
But we were put in that position because we didn't know, and we weren't given any forewarning. And I said to this gentleman, well, the first thing I would do is appeal it. And he said, I already have. I said, good, that's the thing to do. The second thing that I suggest that you do is either come to this meeting, and I don't know if he's here, I don't know the gentleman, just talked with him on the phone. Either come to this meeting this morning and listen to what we're being told, or watch it on TV, watch it on online. And for those people who can't be here this morning, I hope they do watch it, the reruns, to hear what is being said. But I believe that this gentleman, and I'm not a professional tax assessor, but I believe that this gentleman does not have to go online and look at property around his house, his rental property, to know that if it went from $700 to $2,500 in taxes, that it was valued incorrectly. I do want to say to you, Mr. Williams, I appreciate your candor. I appreciate your willingness to come here this morning and take all this. You represent the department very well, and I appreciate your doing that. I just think that all of us would have been much better served if we had had some information early on, and not when I clicked online and saw an email that said, have you been to your mailbox yet this morning? That was a real concern. But I do appreciate your being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have Counselor Woodson.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for being here. It was a very interesting presentation. I think it's a very good educational process. Sometimes we assume everyone knows the process or the system or how it works. My feelings are basically the same as my colleagues, so I'm not going to repeat myself with the comments that have been made here. I'm pretty sure, like you, when you were surprised when you opened your bill and it went down, you have an understanding of what it is, so you did exactly what you felt was right. Not everybody has that understanding. Not everybody has a computer. Not everybody understands the technology behind it. So I would ask that, I think that the department should go back and look, or the board, at how they notify individuals when an increase is so high like this. Because the reality is times are hard right now. People are already living paycheck to paycheck. People already have a lot of debt, and there are some people that are not going to be able to pay that 80%. You know, their children come the holidays are not going to see anything because they're trying to save the roof over their heads. Children are not going to understand that. That's just the bottom line.
Right.
So why I understand the process, I think it needs a little humane in the process to understand that everyone's not the same. It's not a cut and paste. Like for you, unfortunately, you just have to put all this documentation in and the system does it. It's out of your control. But I tend to agree, if you notice that it's kind of like unusual, it is a good way to notify, let someone know. I think the amount of, if something's on an appeal process, that individual should be able to pay whatever they normally paid, and then after the appeal process, then pay the additional, or it stays at where it's at. Because it's kind of hard for families to put forth money. And please, don't get me wrong, I'm trying to find solutions. The complaints have already been made. I think you've heard it loud and clear, at least from that side. You're going to hear it from this side. You're hearing it. So we got to now find a solution to the problem. So all I'm trying to do is suggest some things that, I feel that can be done to kind of help the blow a little bit, because it's very substantial.
Councilor Woodson, if I could interrupt for just 1 second. We are not the tax commissioner's office. We have no authority nor control over the collection of property taxes. The 85% that was mentioned earlier is not a rule that we've made up. It is a statutorily mandated payment. We have no leeway there.
I understand that, but you missed my point, and I'm respectfully saying that. The point is that you're here, you're speaking, you're hearing the crowd, you're the representation at this time. Even if it's not in your department, even if you don't handle it, then I feel the responsibility should be that you contact that area and say, look, we went before and we heard all this, we needed all these. We had to address those concerns, even for your department, and get them involved. Sometimes we tend to stay in the box and never look outside the box. And why you might feel defensive in what I'm saying, I'm actually trying to help you in the sense of, to help the community too, to understand what's going on. Because if I have something and someone says something to me about Gary or Pops, I'm going to call Gary and Pops and say, hey man, I was here and this happened. That's the same thing. So respectfully, I ask that of you. Earlier, it was said the way it was done, the past pictures, the new format with the new GPS, or whatever you call it, and then it shows it. And you said that then someone would go out to the property and reassess the outside of the property. At that time, why isn't like a notice placed? That we have came by, that we stopped by to reevaluate your house. If you have any questions, please contact us, please call us. Just like Councilor Thomas said, that would be, very nerve-wracking to me to know if somebody was parked in front of my house. Everybody don't listen to the media. Everybody don't hear the radio. Everybody's life is so complicated now. But to have someone there and you don't even know about it. And that notification alone would have told me, let me call the tax assessors. Why are they at my house? What are they looking at? Is my taxes getting ready to go up? Then I need to know why. Those are the things that, why they're out of your control, some of it, because some of it's out of your control. But the networking portion of it, it can come all together to work. I want to also make clear something. You said the property freeze. You said that property is assessed, but then the property freeze intimate of it is added to it. But if anything beyond, I think it was like, 200, 2,000?
We're talking about the 2 acres of land?
The 2 acres of land, then that gets assessed.
Well, it all gets assessed.
Okay.
We put a value on everything. The homestead exemption allows you to freeze the value for taxation purposes of your house in 2 acres.
Okay.
That's law. Anything in excess of 2 acres is not frozen, so that could go up or down. That's what I'm only talking about, that excess land. The H account is what was in question before. That's the land in addition to the 2 acres that your homesteaded house sits on.
Here's another one that really concerned me, the rezoning portion of it. Because when a person buys their home, they don't know where the rezoning is at their home unless they're buying a subdivision. And you're saying that the taxes are being evaluated by the rezoning of the property?
Not necessarily by the rezoning. When we
Okay.
value property, every appraiser should consider the property's highest and best use. Well, that's connected to zoning, because your highest and best use is not going to be something that's not allowed by zoning. So it's just an analysis, what is the highest and best use, meaning the value that this property will bring, the highest value. The highest, it's not always the highest value, normally it is. What the highest and best use for that property is. So that 1943 house I was describing, it was, when it was built in residential zoning. But the growth of the city and the rezoning like took place earlier this morning here in this council chambers, those types of rezonings change the zoning of that land. So it's now zoned commercial, but there's a house on it. So it's called interim use. It's the highest and best use would be if there were demand for the commercial property, clean the house off the property and build a commercial building there. But there's no demand for that commercial property, so there's an interim use, which is a house on a commercial lot, a rental house.
Now, do
single family.
y'all decide that? Or-
Zoning? No, ma'am.
No, I'm saying about if it, the use of it, when you create the taxes, do y'all say, okay, there's a house there, so we really can't rezone it, we can't really tax it at that level as it is rezoned, or do you just have to wait until that household, the owner contacts you?
We assess, not tax. We assess the property based on its highest and best use, but also its current use when there's no demand for that higher and best use commercial in my example. So the system says the land is in commercial zoning. We assess it as a commercial piece of property. Then we go back and say, now there's a land use code that says commercial property, residential structure. So that code's put into place that brings that value back into a residential valuation versus a purely commercial valuation.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much.
All right. We next have Counselor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. Counselor Garrett and Counselor Davis were correct. I have received a lot of calls, and people are as upset as Counselor Davis described. Without knowing or hearing Mr. Wise's presentation on the software package, I find it unbelievable that this many errors could have occurred in property valuations. And it's all over the board, has been discussed. And without being redundant, let me just give you one or two examples. A gentleman was told about his rental property that it was within a certain radius of a grocery store and a school, so it needed to be increased. Now, I'm not sure if it was exactly said that way, but that's what he heard. When he talked to him, the adjustment was made downward, and he was happy when he left. So I appreciate your staff and that. And before I go forward, let me say I too appreciate you being here. This is not a meeting most people would like to come to, but I do appreciate you being here and your professionalism. The other example I want to use is you talked about the overlay. There's a friend of mine who has a lake adjacent to his property. And the lake is many acres. And the assessment he received on that piece of property outside his homestead was as though the lake is vacant land to be commercial or sold, developed, or whatever. So the overlay that you're utilizing is not accurate if it can't identify a lake that's pretty large and has been there for a number of years. So to say that the system is right and we're moving forward and they just need to appeal is pretty much a flippant response, I think. And we need to take a harder look at what we're looking at. I think Councilor Woodson was correct. The 85% payment by those that have been overassessed, in my opinion, is unrealistic in this day and time. We need to look at a better way to approach this and work with the citizens in that environment. I would like to go back to a question Councilor Davis.
Councilor Adam, could I respond to those comments?
Let me finish my
Okay.
thought, please. I would like to go back to a question that Councilor Davis put on the table, and that is the process. And if, Mr. Williams, if you could walk us through the process regarding the tax digest and how that's approved with the State Revenue Department. Walk us through from A to Z so everybody's aware of how this all comes together and works to our tax digest, if you could.
I may get my boss up here, Ms. Middleton, because she knows about our portion of that process, having been here for 50-plus years. She's been through many of these, and she's also been through the last countywide revaluation. She's the only person in our office that has been through one of those. But we don't take the digest to the Department of Revenue. The tax commissioner does. We prepare the values of the properties in the county and give those values to the tax commissioner,
Okay.
and she takes it from there. Ms. Middleton, do you have anything to add to that as far as our process, our portion of the digest preparation?
What happens after the tax commissioner receives your work?
She prepares all of the values and consolidates them into what is the final digest before she takes to Atlanta and reviews it.
So there's no other entity involved in the approval process of the tax digest?
Not that it goes to Atlanta, then they approve it or disapprove it. They have the option of disapproving it if they don't think that it's properly prepared.
So it doesn't come to council for us to approve and then you send all that data up there? It just goes straight from the tax commissioner to the?
Correct.
To the,
It goes from the tax assessor's office to the tax commissioner to the Georgia Department of Revenue.
okay. That's all I have right now, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see, we next have the Mayor Pro Tem.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm sorry I missed the first part of your presentation. I understand it was real good, but the parking lot was completely full, and it was prime property out there trying to find the parking space. But I just want to say that I think most of the talk has been on property that was valued upward. My concern has been property that was valued downward. My home went down $57,773 in value. And I'm sure my neighbors probably went down to, one of my constituents probably went down $120,000 in value. What I did when I got my notice and I read it, first I couldn't believe it. But I didn't want to put any blame on anybody. I said, what the crap is going on? But I called the city manager. It was after 5 o'clock, so I got him on the cell phone. And I called the mayor, and I called our budget chair, Councilor Henderson. And they had received a lot of phone calls also. And the mayor's suggestion to me was to file an appeal, call the tax assessor's office and do an appeal. And that's the same thing I told my constituents whose property went down in value. But it's just hard to understand that the property would go down so far. You know, values can go down, but for it to go down 37, 50, in some cases 50%, that's the problem that people are having and trying to understand. But I'm telling them, call or appeal to the tax assessor's office. So I'm glad you were here today to tell them how to do the appeal process. And I know they're going to do it because they're going to call me, and I'm going to continue to tell them to file an appeal.
That's the right answer, ma'am. And hopefully they'll be calling you back and letting you know they did that, and they spoke to somebody in my department that was very helpful and friendly and walk them through the process, because that is our goal. As I said before, your constituents are our customers, and we take their service very seriously. So yes, it's a stressful time. It's a busy time in our office, and we're on it as much as we can be on it to help our customers work through this process.
And I also tried to remind people, as the mayor reminded me, that even though my property value went down, my taxes won't be affected because I'm frozen. But if I decided I wanted to go out tomorrow and sell my house, it would affect me in a way, and it will and it won't.
Let me, if I may, and I certainly don't mean to interrupt you. As a fee appraiser, and Mr. Henderson knows this, buyers may look at the fair market value of your property on your assessment to see if your asking price is in line with what they have it assessed for. As an appraiser, and the appraiser is the appraisal is the document the bank's going to get to support the value of your house. That appraiser does not look at the fair market value on the assessment to determine anything about the value of your home when you sell or buy. That's a fact.
Okay.
So people look at those assessments, and if they looked at mine went down $35,000. If they looked at my assessment, I'd not only be asking more than was on it last year, I'd certainly asking more than it's on it now to list my house. And they'd ask me, why is it so much higher than the fair market value for assessment purposes in the tax assessor's office? I'd say, well, they don't know my property like I know my property. And we don't. Nobody knows my house like me. Nobody knows your house like you. So we do the mass appraisal on 70,000 parcels. I keep telling you that. Our only opportunity to drill down and know about your house is in an appeal. Same with me.
Okay. All right, we've got some other counselors. I do want to say, because the Mayor Pro Tem mentioned, we did send out, as Randy mentioned, there was a media release that the Board of Tax Assessors sent out, but none of the media units picked it up. So Alva and some of the others, please do. It has some good information in it. And I think, Randy, did you bring extra copies that you can get to folks?
Yes.
And we did send it to counselors I think Randy sent it, or Clifton sent it last week sometime, so
The
counselors would
city
have that
attorney's
information.
office did send it out. I do have extra copies with me today,
Okay.
and we'll be happy to give it to any of the
Well,
news
and maybe
media.
just because obviously this will bring a lot more people calling counselors and our office and all that. Maybe either Lucy or you send it out to counselors again.
Okay.
And make sure all the media folks have it, because I know, as the Mayor Pro Tem said, I used it when people were calling me. I just forwarded them your press release. So anyway, all right, moving on. Let's see, Counselor Garrett.
Sorry to get back on the horn again, but I had more questions after Counselor Davis and Counselor Allen Thomas. Okay, so one of the things y'all said, it seems like every year we're supposed to be reappraising or reassessing a third of the properties. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
So in theory, we wouldn't go more than at least 3 years without something being reassessed.
In theory,
In theory.
every property will be assessed every 3 years.
Okay, so we're talking about folks who are having a 500,000% increase, and, you know, they should have at least been reassessed in the past 5 years, just for instance. Would that be correct?
They
Okay.
should have, that property should have been seen in the last 3 years.
Okay.
And when I say seen, looked at,
Sure,
doesn't mean a physical
sure.
inspection of the property.
Well, we've got, I would say, I'd posit say the majority of this audience is here because they're upset about their property taxes, and they are wasting time here, you know, because they're upset with council and upset with the assessors and upset just with the process. And we've got things that are just obvious red flags. I think doubling your property value should be a red flag. We aren't California. We're not even Atlanta. We don't have millions of people. We don't have a tremendously limited supply of resources and land. I don't get how, even for a grocery store, to me, there should be a presumption on our end. And I mean, this is not y'all's fault. I mean, you're doing a great job. It sounds like you're fixing things when they appeal. But I believe in the future, we need to have some sort of flagging system where if somebody's property doubles, maybe even less than doubles, we need to nip that in the bud before they get worked up and they get upset. Because when you're doing an individualized analysis, like with Counselor Allen's case, where there was a grocery store and that type of thing, they should never be burdened with having to spend the time to file the appeal. If it's something that's blatant and obvious, we should have never assessed that high. And there should be a way of flagging that. I mean, it should be real obvious with the ones that are 1,000%. It should be pretty obvious with 100%. It should be pretty obvious with a 50% increase in a year when it should have been assessed 3 years ago at a minimum. But I would just say we need to do that, because what it's telling them to me is, if looking at the system and looking at it online, if they can't already make that determination, then yeah, I do probably need to go hire an appraiser or attorney. And that's added cost, it's extra time, because if it wasn't done right with everything that was accessible to me as a citizen, then how else do I combat it? Because they've got access to the same information I do. But I'd like us to, in the future, come up with a system that nips this in the bud before we have a room full of people who are business owners and people who are property owners and folks who are renters, before they're wasting their time at council. I want to make sure they're not wasting their time and that we're doing it on the front end. But that's all I got to say.
Thank you.
I think Counselor Garrett raised a question that had come up earlier, and we decided to get back to Counselor's questions. I think it would be a good time maybe to hear from Tyler. I mean, I would be interested, I'm sure the citizens are interested in, for instance, surely to goodness, as you're going through those spreadsheets you talked about, if you see somebody who's increased 1,000%, I mean, I know there's human error, as you said, and obviously maybe he thought it was something else, and 10%, and he just moved on. But I'd like to know what process, what process, you're not at next, Counselor Huff, there's a couple of counselors ahead of you. Just sort of briefly explain that, because I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, it's Steve Tyler, who's the on-site project manager for the revaluation portion of this project. And I'm gonna ask Steve to give you the, not the spiel, but same thing you talk to taxpayers, and that's about the simplest approach that I've heard you give. Again, not to oversimplify, but I think you'll get the perspective that you're looking for.
Hello, everyone. My name is Steve Wise. I'm the project manager overseeing the revaluation for Tyler Technologies. I'm not sure. I think a lot of the focus today has been on the negative, and one of the things that I would just like to start with is I tend to be an optimistic person. I tend to focus a lot more on the positive than I do on the negative. A lot of the issues that I've seen, some of the issues that I've seen in regards to some of the appeals that have come in that we've worked, are instances where they would be what we would call an exception, an outlier, so to speak. A lot of the issues that we're seeing are not in any way any kind of a systemic, broad-based, viral infection of the entire tax digest as far as the tax roll. The system that we have in place, the system that we used as far as IAS World, and I'm not a conversion guy, I'm a valuation guy. So I can talk in terms of valuation, not conversion. But some of the issues that we've saw, and John mentioned a little bit briefly, were a few that were in conversion. For instance, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of questions, concerns in regards to land. We spend an exhaustive amount of time on land in this county. This is a unique county. Not to say that this isn't a county that we couldn't handle, otherwise we wouldn't have been contracted to perform the job. But it is an interesting and it is a challenging, excuse me, county at times in the fact that you have varying degrees of market. You have varying degrees of land sizes. You have varying degrees of land uses, and you have varying degrees of property types, age of property types, styles, anywhere from something that was built in 2016 that's above the J.R. Allen Parkway line out to the Panhandle. Once you go downtown into the Broadway Historic District, you have properties that are, built in the late 1800s. So it does present a challenge, but at the end of the day, the thing that I think has not been mentioned, and I've been taking a lot of notes as I've been hearing the conversation is the market. And one of the things I want people to understand is the values that were placed on these properties, the values that were put as far as these assessment values were based on the market. This wasn't anything that I decided. This wasn't anything that John decided. This isn't anything that the Board of Assessors decided. This wasn't anything that the council decided. The market decided the value on those properties in those neighborhoods. Now, when you do a mass appraisal project, let's say you have 100 parcels in a neighborhood. Those parcels are looked at as a group or as a whole. Obviously, every parcel is different. You may have a different grade on the property. You may have a different style of property. You may have a 2-story. You may have a 1-story. When those properties are valued, as John mentioned, they're compared to similar properties in that neighborhood. So the sales in that neighborhood would dictate the value of the land and would also dictate the value of the improvements based on the sales in that neighborhood that were looked at over a 3-year time frame. There was over 3,200 sales that, as an office and my crew evaluated, that were used, valid sales, that were used to determine that value. So, to give you an example, we had an appeal yesterday from a taxpayer, nice gentleman, called on the phone, talked to our residential department manager, and he decided to come into office, and he had a lot of questions. So I fielded the questions with the property owner. Now, he owns some of the land up above J.R. Allen Parkway. He was right on the county line where Harris County and Muskogee County meet. I believe it's County Place? Country Place, sorry, Country Place. So that land up in that neighborhood, with the sales that we had in that neighborhood, dictated that the price or the value of the price per acre or the price per square foot, depending on how we valued that land, was worth a certain amount in that neighborhood. So once we determined what that price per acre or price per square foot is based on the sales in that neighborhood, that price per square foot and that sale, those sales would dictate the rate or the price per acre of those parcels in that neighborhood. Unfortunately, without knowing that he had a restriction on his 3 parcels, by him filing that appeal, that led us to an indication, obviously because of an increase in value. He was at, I think, 23,000, he had 5+ acres of land. And I think he was originally assessed last year at $25,000, and I think his value went to $225,000. So it might have been 10 times more what it was worth last year. Okay, the issue was with his property, and like I said, you know, John continues to go back to the appeal process, and I think that that's the important thing here, that, and I say it all the time, I've said it to these guys, I've said it in the office, I'll say it again, appeals are not necessarily a bad thing. And in this case, the appeal was a good thing because it uncovered something that we didn't know prior, where a restriction had been placed on his 3 parcels by the engineering department through the GIS department, which we would have never known that on a spreadsheet. We would have never known that by looking at that in the CAMA system as far as IAS World. That was brought to light by the taxpayer being aware of his property, taking ownership in his property, knowing what the proximity of his property, and knowing that he had a restriction, a buildable, not to build restriction put on his property by the engineering department, which we weren't aware of. Once we got the appeal, once the property owner expressed that to us, we were able to look at that parcel, do the investigation, which is part of the process, each individual appeal, is verified for accuracy through the process. Once we realized that, we realized, obviously, that's a no-brainer. There should be some type of adjustment that needed to be placed on that property. And it would be anywhere from 75 to 85%, depending on what the model and what the market said for that particular neighborhood. So that's just an example of some of the appeals that we're seeing.
Let me ask you, John, because I got some counselors excuse me, Steve, if you could just answer the real narrow question of, because I think we've had a great conversation about the appeals process, and I'm sure we'll have some more, and we appreciate you being here, and you can get up at the end, Steve, or if council asks for other questions, certainly respond. But this particular question, I think, seems to be of concern. Before the tax notices went out, what specifically did you do to try and catch 1,000% increase, a 500% increase? I mean, I would imagine, and I don't know your business at all, but I would imagine there's some sort of process as you're looking through these spreadsheets where you're looking for outliers, where, you know, the Mayor Pro Tem talked about her house goes down, but the next door neighbor's goes up 200%. I would imagine you're catching that. But maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe you do nothing to catch it. So tell us about that specifically. What did you do, if anything, to catch these aberrations?
Back to that spreadsheet, Hades, that I touched on earlier. And if you remember the last time I was here, mid-June, we talked, the key issue at that time was the notices and when they go out and how that pushed back the tax bill. But we started looking at finalizing values, and I apologize, I don't have a timeline here, but that finalizing of values was working through May. And we all along thought it would be finished at the beginning of May, but these complexities were arising like we're discussing, and they're visible on spreadsheets, and that's how we look at what we do in this project, that we're, you know what, this isn't right. And if you remember, I mentioned two areas in town at that time. One of them was the Green Island community and all the variations of property values out there. We discussed Lakeview at that time, but also really these other larger properties. If you're in a, I won't use the, if you're in a standard subdivision where all the houses are pretty standard, those lots should be valued fairly equally. Some are a little bigger, a little smaller, a little variation, but, and if all the houses were built within 2 years, those houses should be very similar in quality. That's an easy subdivision. You take that price per foot for land and price per foot for improvement and drop it in that model, and boom, those values should be very similar to one another. It's easy to do. You get something in these northern county, or northern part of the county we've been talking about, those are not so easy to do. So we looked at spreadsheets, and I mentioned earlier, we looked at spreadsheets that had decreases. We looked at spreadsheets with increases, and we looked at spreadsheets that had no change. And I can't remember, the number 29,000 comes to mind as far as increases. So on that spreadsheet were 29,000 parcels that had increases from 1% or 0.01% all the way up to apparently 1,000%. I don't recall what the top percent change was. And just because it's a high percent change, again, nobody wants to hear this or acknowledge it, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. We had a vacant land sitting in a subdivision. He had been assessed at a nominal value. His value went up over 200%. But when we looked at it and showed him, compared his lot to the values of all the other improvements, he's right on it. So that 200% increase was accurate. Now, why was he at a fraction of that value? I can't tell you. The value was probably placed on the property when the subdivision was developed, and we changed those values as houses get put on them. We reassessed the land and the house together. So that was quite possibly the last vacant piece of land in that subdivision. Hadn't been changed. But we changed it, and it was supposed to have been changed. So there are instances where increases are okay, even great increases, 100, 200%. All I can tell you is we looked through these spreadsheets prior to the notices going out. When they went out on a Friday, we had to, I'll just say, lock the system down. We had to lock our assessment screens to prepare for, let's create the file that's got to go to the print vendor. We have to proof that file, make sure all those values line up in every field, make sure everything's correct, make sure the exemptions are correct, make sure the dollar amount of the exemption is correct. So that week leading up to Friday, the 30th of June, was all about proofing the file going to the vendor. And prior to that last week in June, all the way back to probably mid-May, all we did was look at values and spreadsheets. And if there were some 1,000% increase that got through and we didn't catch it, then that was one of those 70,000 parcels that we just didn't have the allocated, the resources, the time to go through every single one of them prior to those notices going out. What Steve has done since those notices went out, he looked at all 29,000 properties on a spreadsheet, just like you're talking about, and going through and identifying some that were, because he can group them by neighborhood, the neighborhoods we've been talking about, and group those, and then look at the changes, and you can see these anomalies, as you put it, that are within neighborhoods that need probably some additional consideration. Something just doesn't look right. But we don't go in and just across the board change values during this appeal period. So that's why I always take you back to this. This is the period that the taxpayer communicates with us on what to do, what parcel to look at. Then we can go back and look at bigger neighborhoods, as I said earlier in the presentation, neighborhoods where there's a pretty large percentage of appeal here. Maybe we need to look at that whole neighborhood and see what was wrong, if anything. Again, just because it's higher doesn't mean it's wrong.
Okay. Counselor Henderson.
Thank you. And I'm not going to, I'm going to wait and rewatch. I apologize for not being here for the presentation. My wife was having a little eye surgery, and I had to wait on my relief to come before I could make the meeting this morning. So I'll call you with some specific questions so I don't replow the same ground. But I think the one issue that I am having trouble getting past is what the mayor has indicated, and I'm assuming some of my colleagues have, and that is, I have the luxury of working around 120 real estate agents that when I was getting these calls, I would go to them. Those who can do, those who can't teach, I teach. So I talk to them about it, and I'm getting a lot of interesting comments back. And it just seems to me that even if these things were not reassessed for 8 years, that would have been post-recession, where property values really surprised a lot of people and declined in value. And in Muskogee County, speaking generally, because I know that's what you have to do with that big a number, it hasn't recovered as quickly as some of the other areas of the country. So when we see areas that are that are seeing $100,000 reduction in value, it just seems to me unlikely that in some subdivisions that are 25, 30 years old, that a house that's been there for 20 years would have seen a $80,000 jump. And I had a guy stop me in the doctor's office this morning telling me that's precisely what happened. And I just think that you guys have an almost insurmountable task to try to get this right and to try to be fair to the taxpayers and to make sure that we really are doing it according to value. But it seems to me that what this highlights is we have utilized the new technology to generate these much quicker, and if we move at a more rapid pace, there is a greater likelihood for more of these anomalies. When I contact you, I'll ask you my specific questions, but I do want to implore Tyler Industries and you guys to try to come up with some procedural ways or maybe some checks and balances, because I can see that this would happen almost every 3 years as some of these are cycling back through. A couple of quick questions. You mentioned the approaches you use for valuation. If you're in a residential neighborhood and you have a rental property, do you use the income approach or do you use the more of a comparable approach?
Historically, we would use that sales comparison approach depending on the age of the property. If it was relatively new, we'd use the cost approach.
Okay.
There's been a recent change in the Georgia state law that used to be, I would call it a recommendation to consider the income approach to value if the property produced income. A lot of times we speak about residential, that's the
Right.
majority of our property
Right.
base here. Commercial, it's almost always going to be on an income or cost because there's unique buildings there's not a lot of sales of.
Right.
So I mentioned this yesterday in our board meeting, and as a realtor, and I'm speaking to any realtor out there that's listening to this, the thing that we need to have to use an income approach to value is a gross rent multiplier. And that's a bunch of gobbledygook to people that don't know what that is. But that ratio relates income to value. The only way you can produce a gross rent multiplier is to have a sale of a property that has a tenant in it at the time of sale, only. So if it's sold, then we can produce, okay, well, it's sold for this value and it had this much rent, so then the ratio or the rate, gross rent multiplier rate is this. Then we can take that gross rent multiplier and apply it to a property you have $800 or $1,000 in rent on. It tells us what the income approach to value is. We're now mandated by law to use the income approach to value when the information is available. Without that gross rent multiplier that only comes from the sale of a rented property with a tenant in it at the time of sale, it's the only thing we can use to do an income approach
The
to
law
value.
requires that on a single-family residence, or is it on
Single-family residence,
multifamily? Because
multifamily.
it makes more sense on a multifamily unit, even if you get into a quadruplex or small apartment units. But for a single-family residence, even though whoever owns it now may have used it for the past several years as an investment property, there's always that opportunity that if the property's sold, it may revert back to owner-occupied.
Correct.
And so it just seems like, I'm trying to figure out how we ended up with some of these rental properties a lot higher. And I do want to make a point. I know there's some conspiracy theorists that think that this was targeting non-frozen properties. I've gotten about 8 calls, and I've had 2 from people who did not understand they were still, their assessment was still frozen, and their values increased. So now I've heard from a lot of other folks who were frozen who did decrease. But I talked to a guy this morning that owns a lot of rental property, a lot of investment property. And he said, I asked him, I said, well, you can appeal. He said, well, I made some of them. He said, but I've broke even. He said, half of them went up, half of them went down. So anyway, I'll call you later offline, but I am very concerned about the fact that, Carmen used to say it just, some things don't pass the smell test.
Right.
And when you have so many properties with such a large reduction in areas that are attractive, that are actively moving in the real estate market, and then to have some others who are in older areas that just went up so much and without any improvement, that just, I think there's some opportunities for us to identify those and maybe catch them before these things go out. So I appreciate you, and I'm sorry I missed your presentation.
Oh, that's okay. And we did catch a lot, and it doesn't look like it based on some of the conversation here today about the 1,000% increase or the 100% increase. We caught a lot and made adjustments to them a lot, but let me also clarify, just because it produces income, and we do have a gross rent multiplier, that doesn't mean that's the only approach to value we're going to use.
But in some of these that I was getting calls on, and of course I may eat my words, I hope not, but I told them, I said, that's just clearly an error. I said, you need to appeal that because, and as Councilor Allen was talking about the gentleman with the lake, I mean, that lake in 3 years did not improve in value from, $30,000 to $300,000. I just, and I know when people see that, the starkness of it, it would make me go ballistic. But the reality is that through a very basic appeal process, I can't imagine that not being corrected.
And I certainly see where you're coming from, and just the sound of it would make you think that there's some kind of anomaly that needs to be fixed there.
Yeah, the specifics about it that they'll get into, I mean, there's no road frontage, there's no access, there's no building site around it. It's simply a community lake that happens to be owned by one individual.
And this is a perfect example of that one parcel now under appeal where we can go in and look at those impacts on value and place those in the system.
John, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have now Counselor Huff.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate all the information. I want to start at the top. I was speaking on Sunday and informed the group that they should take a look at the notices, and if they disapprove, go through the appeal process.
Good.
First, about the glitch, no glitch. There is no glitch in the software.
That's correct.
Okay. On the low end, if you appeal and your value is increased, how does that affect other properties around you?
Around you?
Yeah.
I mentioned a circumstance where if we had a large percentage of properties appealed in a neighborhood or a subdivision, but not all of them appealed, say 10 or 20% appealed, and through working those appeals, we saw that, you know what, there's something funny about this land rate. Let's look at the land rate in that subdivision. Because if 10 of them are like that, there's a good probability that maybe some more like that. So we'll look at all those. But we can't file an appeal for you.
Right.
What we can do, if we find a clerical error, if we've made some type of mistake, we can fix that mistake. Now, we can't change a final value that by changing that value, it hurts the taxpayer. Does that make sense? So it doesn't make sense. I see. We can only change our opinion of value if it helps the taxpayer. So if we find that, you know what, we appraised you at $10,000, but your property on further review, it's worth $200,000, and it really is, we can't issue you a new notice for $200,000. We can't go up. Matter of fact, when you appeal your property, and boy, I hate to speak in generalities, when you file an appeal, the law says that your value is either going to stay at what it is or it's going to go down, but it's not going to go up.
Okay. So if you had this one particular homeowner that appealed and no one else, and they won, that's just a win for that one homeowner? Would you take
Yes, sir. And it kind of makes sense, right? We can't just file appeals for everybody. It's our statutory right to file an appeal. And somebody spoke about the burden of filing an appeal or the burden of coming here today. It may take time out of your day to do these things, but that's your right.
Okay. So if you were at a certain market value over the years and it went down, that just means you can't sell for fair market value at the time, what it used to be? You have a new fair market value.
Based on the countywide reassessment, has not, again, I said it earlier, in my opinion, has nothing to do with what you can sell your house for.
Okay. Okay. And on the high end, is it taking place where you mentioned earlier about a subdivision in an area? So would it possibly come out where that subdivision had higher rates than the one on the other side of the same highway in the same area?
There could be a delineation between different sides of a highway.
Okay.
In your example, where there are different land rates were applied. And that could be driven by the market and completely accurate.
Okay. And on vacant land values, would it be a question mark if the land value had been at maybe $1,000 over the years and it rose to $4,000?
Would that be a
question mark to you all when you all were working to take a look at, and now that person just needs to appeal and come?
That person needs to appeal,
okay.
Absolutely. And as the example I gave earlier, it could be justified. That 400% increase could be justified. That $1,000 valuation could be there, and it's never changed for years and years.
Okay, just on vacant land, nothing on the land?
On vacant land, nothing on it.
Okay. Okay, so we have established this morning, we have about 70,000 parcels?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you said 158 appeals thus far. And they mentioned earlier about 85% of the tax bill being paid during the appeal process. So
now, let me just emphasize, remember from our earlier meeting in mid-June, those are due on December 1.
December 1, right.
So you don't have to pay, unless, correct me if I'm wrong.
75% on the value.
Right, but they don't have to pay that till it's due. So you don't have to pay 85% of your taxes from our assessment notice to file an appeal.
Okay.
Your taxes are due when the tax commissioner sends you a bill, and it'll say December 1. Okay. That's when the 85% are due if your property is still under appeal. We may have settled that appeal. It's July now. We're working appeals now.
Okay,
So we'll be working them through, up into the BOE season.
Okay, so the appeal has to be filed by August 14th?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and
That's
then
required by
it
law.
will be ongoing until it's finished?
Yes, until we go through each and every
Complete.
one of them.
Okay, and what happens, well, I guess that's a no-brainer, but if the property value has increased to the point that they can't afford to pay the bill, then they have to sell the land or lose the land?
Sir, I can't answer that question.
Okay, can anybody answer the question?
Well, I mean, I can answer it from a personal perspective. If I can't afford the taxes on a piece of property, I'm gonna have to sell the property
Okay,
or not pay the taxes.
okay.
I don't think that's not an option for me.
Now, I'm just saying,
Yes, sir.
these are questions that have been posed. I just, there are people listening, I just wanted them to hear it.
I think it goes back to the 1,000 to 4,000 example.
Okay,
If there is an anomaly or if there's some type of oversight and those values comes back down, then that's what it is. If we look at it and then there's no oversight, that value stays where it is. And then they're running into, well, I can't afford the taxes on that piece of property anymore. I think that's a personal decision on what you're going to do with that property. There's no decision on our end, is what I meant when I said I can't answer that.
okay. And lastly, you mentioned the process is starting with the Board of Assessors and the tax assessor's office, and then up to the tax commissioner on to Atlanta.
That is the flow of the tax digest.
Digest, okay.
Yes, sir. We're simply talking about individual assessments at this time. And that time period, the August 14th, that ends the appeal period, and we'll still receive them in the mail the following week. But as long as they're postmarked August 14th, that's a timely filed appeal, and it will go into the system and we'll work it. As far as the digest getting to the tax commissioner and the tax commissioner taking that to Atlanta, that's her time frame, it's her time schedule. I know she's already briefed that once to this, to y'all. So I don't speak for her, as I gave you that answer before.
Yeah, so the message from us to the public today is file your appeal?
If you disagree with your value, file your appeal. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you.
All right, and now we have, let's see here, Counselor Allen.
Thank you, Mayor. John, just to clarify, I want you to, you said something early on about your appeal, that it went down, and that you plan to appeal because in the next couple of years, you were looking to sell your house. And when Mayor Pro Tem Pugh talked about her downgrade, you said it doesn't have anything to do with the value, so don't worry about that, but yet, when you're getting ready to sell your house, you're going to appeal to try to get it up. So
Can I explain?
would you please?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
When I got my notice of assessment, I looked at it and I said, wow, that's low. Put it back in the envelope, slid it over to the section of the kitchen counter that collects all that stuff, and had no intention of appealing. Spoke to my wife later that day and she said, well, if it's that low, we won't be able to sell it for what we think it's worth. And I said, no, honey, it doesn't work that way. And it doesn't. But she represents a collection or a percentage of society that says that value does matter. I know, as an appraiser that's been in the mortgage business transaction for 25 years, it doesn't matter at all, but it matters to some, right? So if it mattered to you, you wouldn't pay me more than what it's assessed for, even if that was wrong. You just wouldn't. There's some people that won't. So when I said I'm going to go ahead and appeal to get it up, I'm anticipating that minority, in my opinion, that minority percentage of the populace that says that is the value of your house. So that's why I'm going to appeal it. But I will stand here today, and you can ask anybody that's in the business, it doesn't have anything to do with the appraisal of your home for the mortgage or the offer or the counter or anything like that. But if that explains why I made the decision to appeal, then I took another look at that H account and noticed the change there, and I want to appeal that as well.
Well, I guess my concern is if you put your home on the market.
Yep.
And it sits there for a year, and you have an interested party come in, but they're looking at your assessment, and they're starting to negotiate with you on your price between what you're asking and what your assessment on your tax bill is. It puts you in an awkward situation.
I would get an appraisal.
Well, but I agree, but it puts you in an awkward situation regardless.
It can.
It can. Okay, let's move on. If I recall, when you were here back in June, you talked about a number that you were concerned about, the number of appeals reaching that number. And it's been on social media, and I'm not sure if the number's right. So in working through the appeals, and you get to November, December, and they're not, you realize you got a backlog and you're not going to get through by the end of the year or something like that. At what point does the tax commissioner take this information to the Department of Revenue? I mean, when does she decide, okay, this is the drop dead date, I've got to get this up there, or do you not deliver her the information until you complete the appeal process? I mean, how does that work?
Properties are notated as being under appeal by percentage, and we have 8%. That's that limit that we can get to.
8%?
8%.
Okay.
So the number I used, I believe, was 5860, 5680. I don't have it with me today, but it's
Let's just say
5,700.
6,000. Let's just say 6,000.
Okay, 6,000. As I said earlier, we have already begun to work the appeals and to settle some of them. So I believe, I hate speaking for her, I believe the tax commissioner said she's taking the digest to Atlanta October 1. Does that sound right? I think that's the date she used.
That's why I asked earlier what the process was, because
That's
we're
the bills
we're
going
kind of in the dark on that side of it.
That's the bills going out. Did she say when she was taking the digest to Atlanta? Do you recall? I don't recall that date as well, but there's a date. She's going to take it to Atlanta. If we haven't reduced the appeal number below 8%, she can't take it to Atlanta. So that's why we're working them now, in anticipation of them getting to a higher amount. And the highest to date that my boss, Ms. Middleton, said was about 2,000. It's the highest we've ever had it. It's normally in the hundreds. So at 6,000, that's 3 times the highest amount we've ever had. We may get there. I have no indication right now that we will. If you multiply 159, 58, 160 times, 7 weeks, it's not going to be there. We'll get more probably by week as this goes through the appeal period. I don't think we'll get there, but if we do, I assure you, we'll be all hands on deck working those appeals, trying to get them below that 8%, so the digest will not be delayed.
So did I understand you to say you have 2,000 appeals in-house now?
No, sir.
Requested?
No, sir.
What was that number?
The 2,000 number was the highest amount of appeals we've ever had.
Total? In one
Ever.
year.
That we're at 150, you've used 158. I thought it said 159. If I said 158, I think that number last night was 159 when I looked. There'll be more today. By last Friday, it was 122. So a day later, it's 37 more. So, if you multiply that times 45, I'm not that quick. I don't know what that number is, but I don't think it's 6,000. So again, we're going to do everything we can to work these appeals as they come in and get them reduced or remain the same. Those are our 2 options. No change or reduction, and then get those notices back out to the taxpayers. They then have, if it was a reduction, they have 30 days to decide if they want to accept that reduction or continue on with their appeal. And then if they continue on, they go to the Board of Equalization, those boxes that were talked about earlier. Whatever they've selected is the route they'll go after we have a chance to review and adjust it if necessary.
Okay. One more question, Mayor. The one gentleman that I talked to had property that was assessed 2 years ago, and he did not agree, appealed, went through the Board of Equalization. It was found in his favor, so it was corrected. But with this notice going out, it was increased past what he had one in the appeal from the Board of Equalization. It seems like with that scenario, if someone has gone through the appeal in the past 3 years, they shouldn't have received an increase. I mean, there's seems like the system should have a catch in it for that type situation.
And the rule is 299C, 48529C stated that if you file an appeal, and then an appeal, a value is determined by the Board of Equalization, and it's agreed upon by the taxpayer, that value is for that current year and 2 years to the future, so the next 2 years. So if they filed an appeal for the 15 value, it would be 15 the current year and 16 and 17. That value should be frozen at that BOE value. So if we send a notice in the 3rd year that changed that value, that is an appeal. That they should appeal that because their value should be what it was the prior 2 years. If they're in the 3rd year of that BOE value, it should remain the same. It should not have gone up.
So every
Now,
2 years, they can expect to go back through the process again.
It's 3. It's the current year and the next 2.
Okay. All right.
Now, if they did that 4 years ago, then that value would have gone up correctly, if so indicated by the market.
So should he not have received an increase in 18 rather than 17?
Again, and it just depends on the year that he went to the BOE. It's that current year plus 2. It should be frozen. So if he's within those 3 years, that current year plus 2, it should not have changed.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, and we have, let's see, Counselor Davis.
Mr. Williams, thank you so much for being patient with us today. Hopefully, this won't be as painful,
trying.
but I guess it's a good lesson in democracy today.
Yes, sir.
But I do really appreciate the candor, the demeanor, the professionalism, the attitude. I think it's being handled well today, and I think everybody understands the side we're working on, and we're understand the side you guys are working on. That doesn't negate any of the feelings or how we might perceive matters or understand how things might, the complexity of the matter, but I got a couple questions here in finishing. You know, a lot of people are on consistent schedules as far as paying taxes and all, and you know, and always, you know, we get some of these appeals that come to us all the time through the tax commissioner, and we have to deal with them, and sometimes people don't get their note, for whatever reason, they don't get their notices. We'll throw out the ones that just, they might not get their notice, they might not be aware of this situation, they're just not in the know of what's happening here, and all of a sudden, they experience a big change. What is the tax assessor's office going to do with that part of the citizenry that might potentially come in to your office? Is it strictly by the books here, or is there going to be some leniency in those cases?
Well, I'm not an attorney, and as you know, Mr. Lomax can certainly stand up and talk about that side of your question. But the mandated 45-day period is there, and that is the extent of their appeal period. If they didn't get a notice, for example, let's say for whatever reason, we get all the mail that gets rejected by the post office that gets returned to sender, we get that back. We get it back in several different lists. If there's a forwarding address, we'll forward that. But I know some people refer to the notice as a courtesy. Sounds a little harsh when you consider what they're really saying is you should be aware as a property owner that you have an assessment notice out there. And if you don't get it in the mail, you need to come to the tax assessor's office and get it. Now, that seems harsh to me, especially considering some of the elderly customers we may have. You know, 25 years ago when I appraised property here in the county, there were houses with no computers. And then you watch these computers be added, and not just one, but 2 or 3, and then every room, every person. But there's still people that don't use the computer. So we try to give them alternatives, and the best alternative is our office, because every form we have is in our office. We realize that people can't use the computer, so we'll assist them, even if they don't know how to fill out the form, we'll assist them in filling out the form. Except for the indicated value, we're going to let them come up with that on their own. but we'll assist them in any way we can. But hopefully, we're getting the word out enough to know that notices are on the street. If you don't have one, call us. We have a way to check a list to see if you're one of the people who had a return notice. We even put that list out there for people to see on our website. But you're still required to pay, or you're still required not to pay our bill, but to pay the tax commissioner's bill, even if you didn't get it.
And what kind of understanding are you going to, is the tax assessor's office going to give the citizens having to go through this process that we're talking about, that the confidence, or this body, the confidence that you're going to try to do your best to keep the costs down and work with the citizenry out there to get to what would be a fair and equitable agreement on these matters?
Well, I don't know how I can give you my utmost confidence that that's exactly what's going to happen. As I mentioned earlier, I'm involved with every appeal. I see it before our board sees it. So once my staff finishes their work, and for example, their work may be taxpayer file an appeal, they're going to try to negotiate and work with that taxpayer, especially if there's some kind of fluke that happened, a code didn't get put in or was in and shouldn't have been in. We don't want to go to court. I don't want to go to the BOE unless we just can't come to a mutual agreement on the value of the property. And I've run into people like that. Doesn't matter what I say, how right or wrong I think I am, they're right. And you know what? That's why we go to the Board of Equalization, to let a 3-member board decide who's right. I have my support, they have their support sometimes just what they believe. It's just not worth that. That's what they say. It's just not worth it.
And again, I thank you for your patience today. And the last question
Yes,
is,
sir.
it seems to me that the Board of Equalization might be asked to do a little bit more work this year. What kind of provisions have we discussed, or is there any thought been given to compensate these individuals more, call it overtime, but to help them through this? There's going to be some long hours.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not sure, that some of the people might want to even go through this. But certainly if they're going to be asked to go above and beyond in this 1 year, is any consideration been given to compensate these members accordingly?
I know they get paid a daily rate. Let me reiterate, that we have no control or involvement with the Board of Equalization. They are controlled by the clerk of the court. So that is completely their side of this. We're separated for a reason. We want them to come to their conclusion without being part of us. We're not connected.
Mayor, has there been any consideration in the budget for what the matter I just spoke to? Is that
I'd have to ask Angelica or Pam. I know that we knew, of course, this process was undergoing, so I assume that Betty and the board had it in their budget, in their budget request for, well, I guess for the appeals, wouldn't come through your budget. It would come through, let's get this right here. Would it be in the clerk's budget, or actually, I know they're appointed by the grand jury process,
Yes,
so.
It'd be in the clerk of Superior Court's
Okay.
budget. And the one thing I don't know that, Ms. Williams, you may know, I know they started out with 1, and then they went to 2, and now 3.
There's 3.
Can they expand beyond 3?
I don't know that, but I know there's 3.
And so if...
3 panels. I just want
Yeah,
everybody to know what you're
3
talking
panels.
about.
3
Yes.
boards.
3 boards, and if they could, we'll look into that.
And there's alternates, too.
Ms. Middleton is saying that they can, and I just wanted to make that point. If they get more than usual, it may be that the grand jury or clerk of Superior Court will make a request to expand the number of panels, and then we'd have to talk about what that costs and where it come from.
Why don't we have the clerk come at our next council meeting, tell her these issues and what sort of things council is asking. My vague recollection is, from other circumstances, obviously, that we actually have 3 panels and then some alternates.
That's correct.
So it could be those alternates who are trained and sit when somebody's on vacation or sick or whatever. Maybe they can create their own panel, or, they could get everybody on board and do some things. But she would know that, and she also would know what her budget currently is and what potential impact this may have, so.
Well, we know that we would have funded the 3 panels. And that's why I made mention, if they want to expand the number of panels, I know that we would not have funded that. And if we get to that point that there's a need for more than 3 panels, then we would be talking about what that would cost and where it would come from.
Well, Mr. Williams, Mr. Lomax, others, thank you again for coming and taking the time to share, talk, and discuss this matter in detail.
Yes, sir.
All right, and if you would, Mr. City Manager, I don't know if we need a formal referral, but let's make sure that whether it's a memo, if she can't come, but something that really sets all that out, and let's get it to council. Okay, we have Councilor Baker.
Thank you. Terrific job that all y'all have done. I know it's a difficult situation, but it may be too early. Do you have a feel yet for either as a percentage or a number of cases that you might be able to clear up before it takes the next step to Board of Equalization?
I don't have a number.
Projection.
My feeling is that we're going to address a great percentage of them.
That's clearly the best option if it can be done.
That's my outlook. Those divisions work under me, and that is my objective, is to clear as much of these up as we possibly can and not go to the BOE. But as I mentioned earlier, there are going to be property owners that they don't care.
I understand, and
that's their right
to do.
And I want them there, exactly.
Should be that way.
Exactly.
But just as a procedural, and I know you've got your hands full, but could somebody from your office or the Board of Assessors keep in touch with us as this goes along and say, and I don't like to get involved in specific cases, but here are the number of appeals, here are the number that we've been able to address, so we can get a feel for where we stand.
Yes, sir.
We've been able to clear up as a percentage or a number this many cases that have come in, just so we get a feel for where we are.
I don't know why we couldn't.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have no further questions. It's been over 2.5 hours, so we very much appreciate this. You may well be called back. And I would encourage you also that when we alert the clerk of the Superior Court about this, it may be useful for you all to chat with her and tell her, give her the benefit of this conversation so she can better hone the information we'd like to hear about.
Certainly.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Again. We'll move on with that, and we, again, appreciate your time. Don't go too far because we may need you back soon. With that, we're going to turn it over to the city attorney for her to continue. She was midway through her agenda, as you well know, and thank you all, the rest of you all, citizens, for coming out today, and those who are watching. I've been receiving texts. A lot of citizens have been